back to those two geeks. My name's Alex. Joe is out of office, I suppose, again. I think he's got some kind of walking plague at this point. We'll see. I'm sure he'll be back at some point. Hopefully, he'll be ready and raring to go for next week. We'll see what happens. Today, I wanted to do something a little bit different because it is just me, and I'm sure you don't really want to hear me talk about toys or anything like that. There's no sense in me doing some form of figure review based on what I have on my rapidly cluttered, cluttered uh, desk space at the moment. So we're going to instead talk about Bill Finger because Bill Finger is indirectly responsible for this podcast. Actually, it was because of Bill Finger that I wrote my first, I think, blog post almost 10 years ago, maybe. And the story of Bill Finger has always been somewhat of a passion project of mine. Now, it's one of those things where I think that I'm sure most of you listening would probably have at least seen the name Bill Finger. Maybe you come to us from more of the toy world, the wrestling world. I'm not sure. If you're into comics or you've seen some of the more recent movies featuring Batman, then you would have seen Batman created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger. And there is a reason for that. But we're going to circle back. Today the world knows Batman. He's more than just a comic book hero. He's ultimately a global icon. The cape, the cowl, the tragic origin, the rogues gallery, which I'm sure there's an argument to be made there that it is the best rogues gallery in comics. The bat signal lighting up Gotham sky. But the man behind the myth is probably someone that you've never heard of. And that was Bill Finger. We're going to go way back to 1939, where a young cartoonist named Bob Kane pitched a new superhero to DC Comics, the Batman, with a hyphen. Kane's original sketch was a character in red tights with stiff bat wings and a domino mask. Nothing close to the brooding figure we know today. Now, he then took that to Bill Finger, a writer friend of his. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't connected. He was a writer. He was quiet, imaginative, and he transformed Kane's concept into something extraordinary. It was Bill who gave Batman a signature cowl and a flowing cape. He suggested grey and black instead of red. He gave him Gotham City, Bruce Wayne, the Batmobile, the chilling origin of a boy witnessing the murder of his parents in a dark alley. In other words, Bill Finger shaped Batman into the legend we know today. But you wouldn't have known that. Not for a very long time. When Detective Comics 27 was released, only one name appeared as the creator, and that was Bob Kane. Bill's name was left off. The reason for that is because Bob Kane made a deal, a powerful one, and honestly, it was a good one for Bob Kane. He negotiated with DC Comics for sole credit as Batman's creator, and he got it. For decades, no matter how many stories Bill wrote or characters he created, the world only saw one name. Bill Finger co-created Robin, Catwoman, the Joker, Riddler, Two-Face, Commissioner Gordon. He helped craft the world of Batman layer by layer, but he lived in the shadows of his own creation. He continued to write for DC quietly, inexpensively, without recognition. And in 1974, Bill Finger died, alone, nearly broke, and he was buried in an unmarked grave. For years, his story was buried too, until a new chapter began. In the 2000s, author and researcher Mark Tyler Nobleman set out to uncover Bill Finger's story. He tracked down the archives, interviewed colleagues, and eventually found Bill's granddaughter, Athena Finger. I had the privilege of meeting Athena a few years ago, and she still champions Bill to this day, and rightly so. Together they fought for the truth. The campaign grew, fans, journalists, and creators joined in. In 2015, more than 75 years after Batman's debut, DC Comics finally made a change. For the first time in history, Batman stories began to say Batman created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger. Today, every Batman movie, comic, and show carries that line. It took a lifetime and more for Bill Finger to get the credit he deserved. He may have worked in the shadows, but now he stands in the light. You can actually learn a lot more about this, a lot more than the detail I've covered here. There's a documentary called Batman and Bill, or Mark Tyler Nobleman's book, Bill the Boy Wonder. The artist for Bill the Boy Wonder was Ty Templeton. He also created a single page comic strip that illustrates what would happen if Batman or if Bill Finger had never been involved in Batman. And it actually does quite a lot. It's very eye opening. You can find that online. Google search, honestly, is probably your best bet at this point. If you just search in Batman without Bill Finger, you'll find that. It's it's been 10 years since Bill Finger finally got his credit and got his acknowledgement. And while 10 years is a hell of a long time for his name to be on there, it's a drop in the ocean for the amount of stories that were published without his name on them. I think that even though he's acknowledged now, it's still on us as comic fans, movie fans, TV fans, Batman fans, I suppose, in general, to at least acknowledge and be aware that for a long time, far too long, one of the key voices in Batman's creation was muzzled, was silenced. And yeah, Bill Finger may never know how much we appreciate him, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop speaking up for creators' rights when it comes to comic books, because we don't want the same thing to happen to another creator today that happened to Bill Finger in the early days of comics, almost 100 years ago now. Holy shit, that was a long time ago. Almost 100 years ago now. It's it was a tragedy then. It's a tragedy now, and while you can't change what happened, we can at least do better going forward. There's perhaps one more story to tell, not strictly about Bill Finger at all at this point, but tying into the fight for creators' rights. Now, there was a man long before graphic novels filled bookstores, before comic creators were called auteurs, before there was an industry that respected the artist behind the panel. His name was Will Eisner. He is widely recognized as a master of the form, a pioneer of the medium. He was one of the first voices to stand up and say comic creators deserve more. We're going to talk a little bit about that right now. Eisner was born in 1917 in Brooklyn, New York, just a few years before comics as we know them began to take shape. By the late 1930s, Eisner was already making waves in the industry, not just as a gifted illustrator and storyteller, but as a businessman with a vision. In an era where comic artists worked for peanuts and publishers took all the credits, Eisner saw the problem early and tried to change the rules. He knew the publisher would own the characters. That's how it worked. But he wanted to own his, and so he made a deal. That deal was the Spirit. Unlike most comic properties at the time, The Spirit was owned by Will Eisner himself. It was published in newspapers in 1940, a weekly 7-page feature tucked inside the Sunday comics. It was gritty, stylish, cinematic, and deeply personal. The real story? That was that Will Eisner is carving out something revolutionary: creator ownership. At a time when Superman's creators had sold their rights to the character for just $130, at a time when artists were signing away legacies for a paycheck, Eisner insisted on retaining rights to his own creation. Now, you have to realize that back then, no one had any idea what these characters would become. Did Eisner? Who knows? But he had the foresight to wonder what would happen if these characters blew up, if these stories got any bigger than they were. And because of that, he insisted on retaining the rights to his own creation. He did it decades before words like intellectual property were common in comics. He was ridiculed, he was undervalued, and dismissed as an eccentric. But he knew what was coming. In the decades that followed, Eisner became a mentor, a teacher, and a fierce advocate for the recognition of comics as an art form and of creators as artists. He published the seminal A Contract with God in 1978, one of the first works ever labeled a graphic novel. And with it, he didn't just change storytelling, he changed perception. Eisner fought to elevate comics from pulp to literature. He challenged publishers, pushed for creator credit, and mentored a generation of artists like Frank Miller and Art Spiegelman. In 1988, to honor his legacy, the industry named its highest award after him, the Eisners. Today, they are the comic world's equivalent of the Oscars. But for Will, the real award wasn't a trophy, it was progress. Eisner passed away in 2005, but his fight for recognition, for ownership, for respect lives on. Every time a comic creator retains the rights to their work, every time a graphic novel is taught in a classroom, every time an artist refuses to be invisible, Will Eisner's there. He once said, "A contract with God is really a contract with yourself, a promise to keep going." And that promise to keep going, to keep creating, and to fight for what's right is what made him more than a cartoonist. He was a trailblazer, a visionary, and a hero of a very real kind. The next time you open a comic book, spare a thought for the artist behind that link or behind the ink. They're still fighting. Folks, I'm going to leave it there. I could probably fill a full hour talking about creators of yore, tidbits about Jerry Robinson that I've picked up over the last 10, 15 years from far too many books that I've read. Not comic books, but actual books. I've got Joe Simon's autobiography next to me, his granddaughter's biography of Joe Simon, Stanley, the story of uh, Schuster and Siegel selling the rights to Superman, and so many more. So I'm happy to do something like this again. If it's something that's of interest, hit me up on Bluesky. It's in the show notes, but you should be able to find me if you search up Carcossa, Karcossa. I don't post much, but I try to be responsive. Again, if this is something you're interested in, great. It may rear its head again in the future if I end up doing a recording of it. So, but until next time, stay ready.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.